The mountain road was little more than a scar of brown dirt against the endless green, a path worn by hooves and weather and little else. To the man waiting at its end, it was the boundary of his world. Thorne leaned against the rough-hewn post of his porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows from the tall pines. He had been standing there for an hour, watching that empty road with a feeling like a stone in his gut. Today, the pact would be fulfilled. Years ago, his father had made a bargain with a hidden clan that lived deep in the highest, most treacherous peaks. They were people of great size and strength, stories said, who kept to themselves. When Thorne's father had become lost in a blizzard, one of their hunters had carried him home, saving his life. The debt was to be paid with a union, a daughter of the clan for a son of the ranch, to bring their bloodlines together and ensure future safety. Thorne's father was gone now. The debt remained. A movement caught his eye. At the far curve of the road, a figure appeared. Even at this distance, it was clearly too tall to be a rider on a horse. It walked. Thorne straightened up, his calloused hands gripping the porch rail. As the figure drew nearer, details resolved. It was a woman, wrapped in a heavy, hooded cloak of gray wool that brushed the ground, despite her height. She moved with a hesitant, careful gait, as if afraid the earth itself might crack under her steps. Behind her, trailing at a respectful distance, were two tall, stern-faced men from the clan, their journey done. They stopped at the edge of the meadow, letting her walk the final stretch alone. Thorne took a deep breath and stepped down from the porch. She saw him and froze, a good 20 paces away. He could see now how truly large she was. He was not a small man, but the top of her hood would likely brush the doorframe of his cabin. He raised a hand, not in wave, but in a slow, open-palmed gesture he used with skittish yearlings. "Welcome," he said, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. She did not speak. One large hand, peeking from the cloak sleeve, clutched the woolen fabric closed at her throat. He could see the fear in her wide eyes, a deep, shadowy green like forest pools. It was not the fear of a new place, but the fear of a cornered creature. "My name is Thorne," he tried again. "This is the ranch. You're home now." A slight flinch at the word home. She gave the smallest nod. The silence stretched, filled only by the sigh of the wind in the pines. He gestured toward the cabin. "You must be tired. The road is long. Please, come inside." He turned and walked to the door, holding it open for her, making himself seem as harmless as possible. She approached with slow, measured steps, each one placing her foot with deliberate softness. At the doorway, she hesitated, looking from him to the interior darkness. Then, she ducked her head deeply, almost folding herself in half, to clear the lintel. The act was so practiced, so full of a lifetime of making herself smaller, that it struck a strange pang in Thorne's chest. Inside, the main room was warm from the banked fire and the hearth. She stood just inside, unmoving, like a great carved statue deposited in the wrong temple. Thorne moved to the table, where a simple stew simmered in a pot. "I made food," he said. "You can sit." She looked at the sturdy wooden chair, then back at him. Slowly, she lowered herself onto it. It creaked but held. He served 2 bowls, placing one before her, and sat across the table. He ate, giving her something to mimic. After a moment, she pushed back her hood. Thorne kept his eyes on his bowl, but he saw her. Her hair was the color of dark honey, falling in a heavy braid over one shoulder. Her face was broad and strong-jawed, but softened by youth and a surprising delicacy in her lips. She was, in a way he had not anticipated, strikingly beautiful. And she looked utterly terrified. She picked up the spoon as if it were a tiny, fragile thing. "What is your name?" he asked between mouthfuls. Her voice, when it came, was low and soft, like water over smooth stones. Lyra. Lyra, he repeated. The name suited her. It is good to meet you, Lyra. She glanced up, searching his face for mockery. Finding none, she looked back at her stew. They ate in a silence that was heavy, but not entirely hostile. When they were done, he took the bowls. I'll show you the rest, he said. He led her to a door at the back of the main room. Pushing it open, he revealed a bedroom. It was not large, but it was clean. The bed was a special frame he had built after the pact was confirmed, wider and longer than normal, lashed together with iron-banded joints. A new quilt lay atop it. A simple washstand and a chest were the only other furniture. A window looked out over the moonlit meadow. This is yours, Thorne said, standing in the doorway. He did not enter. This room. No one will come in here. Not even me. Not unless you ask them to. Do you understand? Lyra stared at him, her brow furrowed in pure confusion. Her eyes darted from the bed to his face and back again. This was not the script she had been given. She had been prepared for duty, for demand, for the claiming of a prize. Not for a gift of a locked door from the inside. I understand, she whispered, though she clearly did not. Good, he said, and gave a single, firm nod. Sleep well. The morning will be easier. He turned and walked to his own smaller room off the main area, closing the door with a soft but final click. Alone, Lyra stood in the center of her strange new chamber. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the thick post of the bed. It was solid. Real. She sat on the edge, the frame giving only a little. She listened. The cabin was quiet, but not silent. She could hear the settling of the logs in the hearth, the cry of a distant owl, and the faint, steady sound of the man, Thorne, moving in his room. A rustle of fabric, the creak of his own bed as he lay down. Her body was tense, coiled like a spring. She had braced herself for a different kind of night. For hands, for weight, for the smothering of herself. She had hesitated from the moment she crossed the threshold, waiting for the moment her new life as a bought bride would truly begin. But the house remained quiet. The door to her room remained untouched. Slowly, one by one, she let out the breaths she had been holding. The fear did not leave her, it was a deep, cold well inside her, but atop it, a tiny, impossible spark of something else ignited. It was smaller than a candle flame. It was the feeling of a door left unopened. It was the sound of a man, a stranger, giving her a wall and a silence to call her own. She did not know what it meant. But as she finally lay back on the unfamiliar quilt, staring at the moonlit squares of the ceiling, the stone of dread in her stomach was, for the first time that day, joined by a feather-light flicker of something that was almost, very nearly, relief. The morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of mountain morning that turns breath to mist and paints the grass with a silver frost. Thorne rose first, as always, building the fire back to life from its banked coals. The silence of the cabin felt different now, occupied. He moved with a deliberate quiet, preparing coffee and frying slices of salt pork. He was placing them on 2 plates when he heard the soft, deep creak of her door opening. Lyra emerged, once again wrapped in her cloak, though the hood was down. Her hair was rebraided tightly. She stood by the doorframe, her eyes taking in his movements with the watchfulness of a forest animal at a waterhole. Morning, Thorne said, not turning from the hearth. Food's ready. She approached the table and sat, the process less hesitant than the night before but still performed with a cautious grace, as if the chair might dissolve beneath her. They ate in a silence that was less strained, filled by the crackle of the fire and the clink of tin plates. When he finished, Thorne drained his coffee and stood. "Work to do," he announced, his tone practical. "You can stay inside if you like. Get your bearings." Lyra looked from him to the window, where the vast expanse of the ranch was glowing under the rising sun. "What work?" she asked, her voice barely above the soft rumble of the fire. "Fences need checking. The south pasture gate is weak. Then there's the wood for winter, needs splitting and stacking. The chickens, the garden." He listed the tasks as he pulled on a heavy work jacket. "It's never done." She watched him for a long moment, her large hands folded in her lap. The offer to stay inside, safe and separate, was a kind one. But she understood bargains. She had been given a room, a door. She could not simply take. "I will help," she said, rising to her full height, her head clearing the exposed beams of the cabin's ceiling. Thorne paused, then gave a slow nod. "All right. The fence first." The world outside was immense. Lyra followed Thorne across the dew-soaked meadow, her strides matching two of his. The air was sharp and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. She felt exposed, a giantess in an open field, and she found herself hunching her shoulders again, trying to shrink into the landscape. The south pasture gate was a sorry sight. Two of the vertical posts had rotted at the base, leaning inward like loose teeth, held together only by rusting wire and hope. Thorne handed her a pair of thick leatherwork gloves, which were far too small, so she simply took them and held them. He examined the posts, frowning. "Need to pull these out and set new ones," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He walked to his wagon and returned with a heavy iron bar, using it as a lever against the base of the first post. He strained, his boots digging into the mud, but the post, sunk deep in the earth and tangled with roots, only wobbled. Lyra watched his struggle, his muscles corded with effort. A familiar shame washed over her. This was the sort of task her strength was meant for, the reason her bloodline was valued in the hard mountains. But her strength had always been a thing of awkwardness, of broken tools and frightened glances. She took a step forward, then stopped. Thorne, breathing hard, leaned on the bar. He looked at her, not with expectation, but with a simple assessment. "Could use an extra set of hands," he said, his voice even. The permission, casual as it was a key in a lock. Lyra moved forward. "Stand back," she said softly. Thorne retreated a few paces. She knelt in the cold mud, ignoring the soak through her skirts. She wrapped her long arms around the rotten post, low to the ground. She took a breath, not of strain, but of focus. Then she pulled. It was not a violent jerk, but a steady, rising pressure. The earth made a wet, groaning sound. Roots snapped with dull pops. With a final sigh of released soil, the entire post, along with a clump of dirt and stone, came free from the ground. She held it aloft for a moment, then laid it gently on the grass. She turned to the second post and repeated the motion, her form efficient, powerful. In moments, both rotten posts lay side by side. She stood, mud staining her dress and arms, and looked at Thorne, awaiting the recoil, the widened eyes, the unspoken monster. Thorne let out a low whistle. He walked over and towed one of the discarded posts. "Well," he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "That saved us half a day's digging." He glanced at her. "Thank you." 2 words. Thank you. They were not for her size, or her strange power, but for the simple act of help. Lyra felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun now cresting the pines. She gave a small, stiff nod. The days began to form a pattern. Thorne showed her the rhythms of the ranch. He taught her how to mend a fence properly, how to weave new wire without snapping it. He set her to splitting logs, first with a maul that was too light for her, then with a heavier wedge and sledge he forged for her in his small shop. The first time she brought the sledge down, the seasoned oak round exploded into perfect halves with a single, thunderous crack. Thorne, who had been stacking nearby, jumped at the sound. Lyra froze, the heavy tool hanging in her hands, shame flooding back. But Thorne just laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Guess I won't need to chop kindling this winter," he said, and the tension broke. He showed her the garden, where she learned to thin carrots with fingers that could crush stone but now plucked tiny seedlings with infinite care. He let her feed the chickens, and she delighted in their fearlessness, how they pecked around her large feet without a care. She began to move through the world not as a bull through a china shop, but as a careful steward. Her strength became a focused tool, not a wild force. Then came the day of the wagon. They were hauling stone from the creek bed to repair the hearth. The wagon was loaded, and Thorne was guiding the old draft horse, Bramble, up the slight incline to the yard. A hidden stone shifted under the rear wheel. The wagon lurched violently. There was a sharp crack as the wooden brake block failed, and the loaded wagon began to roll backward, downhill toward a steep drop into the creek. Thorne shouted, pulling on Bramble's harness, but the momentum was too great. His boot caught on a root, and he fell. The wagon wheel, heavy and iron-rimmed, rolled over his leg, pinning him to the ground. A cry of pain was torn from him, followed by a gasp as the weight settled. Lyra was stacking stone nearby. She turned at the sound. Time seemed to slow. She saw Thorne trapped, his face white with pain, the wagon still straining to roll further. Without a thought, without a moment of hesitation for fear or doubt, she dropped the stone in her hands and ran. She did not go for the horse. She went straight to the side of the wagon. Bracing her feet in the loose scree of the path, she placed her large hands under the sideboard. A raw, guttural sound of effort erupted from her, but it was not a scream, it was a command. Her back and shoulders, muscles honed by a lifetime and refined by weeks of ranch work, tightened into cables of power. With a heave that seemed to lift the very world, she raised the wagon. The wheel lifted an inch, then 2, then 6 clear of Thorne's leg. "Pull yourself free," she grunted, the words thick with strain. Thorne, teeth gritted, scrambled backward in the dirt, dragging his leg out from under the crushing weight. The moment he was clear, Lyra let the wagon down with a controlled crash, the boards groaning in protest. Silence returned, broken only by Bramble's nervous snort and Thorne's ragged breathing. He clutched his leg, his face still pale. Lyra looked from him to the wagon, then down at her own hands. The reality of what she had done, the unchecked, brute display of force, crashed down upon her. This was what she was. A creature of violence, of terrifying power. The careful gentleness of the past weeks was a lie. She began to tremble, not from exertion, but from a profound, withering horror. Great, heaving sobs broke from her chest, and she turned away, covering her face with her dirty, powerful hands. "Lyra." She did not stop crying. "Lyra, look at me." His voice was closer. She forced herself to turn. He had managed to sit up, his injured leg stretched out before him. His expression held no fear, no disgust. It was etched with pain, but his eyes were soft. "You saved my life," he said, each word deliberate. She shook her head, tears carving clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. I am a monster." "You saw." "What I saw," Thorne said, wincing as he shifted, "was courage. What I saw was someone using the gift they have to protect another." He reached out a hand, not demanding she take it, just offering it. Your strength is not a curse, Lyra. Today, it was my salvation. Thank you. The words, so similar to those he'd spoken over the fence posts, now held the weight of truth. He had seen her at her most fearsome, at the moment she most hated herself, and he called it a gift. He called it courage. Slowly, her sobs subsided into shaky breaths. She looked at his outstretched hand. Then, with a tenderness that mirrored how she now thinned the carrots, she reached out and took it. Her large, work-rough palm enveloped his. The touch was electric, a solid connection that traveled up her arm and settled around her heart like a warm, steadying hand. He did not flinch from her size or her power. He held on. That evening, by the fire, with his leg propped on a stool and bandaged, the silence between them was a comfortable, shared space. He told her stories of the ranch, of his father. She, in halting sentences, spoke of the high peaks, of the constant cold, of always having to bend. He never let go of her hand. And in that simple, steadfast grip, Lyra felt the fragile, beautiful scaffolding of trust being built, piece by piece, around the fortress of her strength. The change in the air arrived hours before the storm itself. By midday, a strange, oppressive stillness had settled over the ranch. The birds fell silent. The wind, usually a constant whisper in the pines, died completely, leaving a vacuum that seemed to thrum with anticipation. Thorne, his legs still stiff but healing, moved with a practiced urgency, securing shutters, tying down tools, leading Bramble and the milk cow into the sturdy barn. Lyra worked beside him, her movements just as focused. She understood the language of mountains, the portent in the unnatural quiet. The first distant grumble of thunder rolled across the peaks as they bolted the cabin doors shut behind them. It was a sound like stone giants shifting in their sleep. Within minutes, the sky turned the color of a bruise, and the wind returned with a shriek, hurling itself against the log walls. Rain followed, not in drops but in a solid, lashing sheet that blurred the world into gray fury. The cabin, which had felt spacious in the quiet weeks, suddenly became the entire universe, a wooden island in a roaring sea of wind and water. Lyra stood by the cold hearth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the window where the world had vanished. Each thunderclap, closer now and sharp as splitting timber, made her flinch. It was not the storm itself she feared, but the feeling it awoke, the helplessness, the trapped sensation, the memory of howling winds and the high passes that sounded like voices screaming. She was a creature of solid earth and quiet strength. This chaos felt like an unraveling of the world. Thorne built up the fire, pushing the darkness back to the corners of the room. The flames cast dancing, monstrous shadows that leapt with every lightning flash. He saw her tension, the way she had gone rigid, her eyes wide and fixed on nothing. "It's just a mountain storm," he said, his voice raised over the din. "The cabin has weathered 100 worse." She nodded, a short, jerky motion, but did not relax. The next thunderclap exploded directly overhead, a deafening crack that shook the very logs. Lyra gasped, a small, bitten-off sound of pure fright, and took an involuntary step back. Something in that sound, that rare show of vulnerability from such a strong being, broke through Thorne's own reserve. He had been holding back words for days, weeks, watching her bloom with quiet wonder. Seeing her now, terrified by the very sky, brought them to the surface in a raw tide. He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that the firelight warmed them both. The storm raged, but in the circle of their space, there was a sudden, profound stillness. "Lyra," he said, and his voice was low, rough, stripped bare by the truth in it. "I can't hold it in any more." She looked at him, confused, her fear of the storm momentarily overshadowed. "Hold what in?" "This." He gestured between them, a helpless, powerful motion. "You." the way you are. You think you are here because of a pact. A duty. He took a deep, shuddering breath. You are not a duty to me. You never were. You are a light in this lonely place. You are the reason I watch for the sunrise. Her lips parted in shock. No one had ever spoken to her of light. She was spoken of as sturdy, as strong, as useful. Never as something that illuminated. Thorne, she began, but her voice failed her. The storm outside mirrored the one suddenly breaking within her chest, a tumult of hope so terrifying it dwarfed the thunder. I don't know how to be with a man, she whispered finally, the confession torn from her, more frightening than any admission of physical weakness. I was only taught to be a wife in word, not in feeling. Not in this. He reached out then, not to grab, but to offer. His work-roughened hand hovered near her face. We don't have to know, he said, his voice softening into a tenderness that melted the last of her defenses. We can learn together. May I? At her tremulous nod, he did not kiss her mouth. He began with reverence. He lifted her large, capable hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a kiss that spoke of gratitude for every fence post lifted, every log split. He kissed the inside of her wrist, where her pulse hammered like a trapped bird, a kiss that honored the life that surged within her. He traced the line of her jaw, his touch a whisper against her skin, and then, finally, he leaned in and kissed her lips. It was not a kiss of conquest, but of discovery. It was soft, questioning, a silent conversation. And Lyra, after a heart-stopping moment of uncertainty, answered. Her lips moved against his, clumsy at first, then with a dawning hunger. The world narrowed to the feel of his mouth, the scratch of his beard, the solid warmth of his chest beneath her tentative hands. The storm outside faded into a distant rumble, its fury now merely an accompaniment to the quiet revolution happening within the cabin's walls. Thorne led her not to her room, or his, but to the thick bearskin rug before the fire, where the light was warm and golden. With infinite patience, he helped her out of her simple dress, his hands never rushing, his eyes never leaving hers, always asking permission with a look. When she stood before him, her form powerful and magnificent in the flickering glow, he did not stare in awe or fear. He looked at her as a man looks upon a profound and beautiful truth. You are so beautiful, he murmured, the words a prayer. Every part of you. And he showed her. With his hands and his lips, he charted the landscape of her. He kissed the strong curve of her shoulder, the powerful slope of her back, the gentle swell of her stomach. He worshipped the muscles of her arms, not as something strange, but as part of her exquisite whole. He taught her that her skin could sing under a touch, that the places she had hidden could become centers of shimmering pleasure. Lyra, emboldened by his devotion, began her own exploration. Her large hands, so capable of breaking, learned a new skill. They learned the shape of his shoulders, the planes of his chest, the beat of his heart under her palm. She learned to touch with a curiosity that was both shy and eager, discovering how a breath caught in his throat when her fingers traced his spine, how his name on her lips was a sound he seemed to drink in. When they came together, it was a slow, seamless merging. There was no awkwardness, only a profound rightness. He was careful, so careful, but she guided him with a newfound confidence, her strength not in force but in an open, accepting grace. The world was reduced to shared breath, to whispered names, to the dance of firelight on their joined bodies. It was not an act of taking, but of giving and becoming. In his arms, held with a fierceness that matched her own, Lyra did not feel like a giantess or a bride of a pact. She felt small, and precious, and utterly, completely loved. The storm outside finally blew itself out, leaving a silence filled only with the crackle of the fire and the peaceful sound of their breathing, two hearts finding shelter, not from the rain, but in each other. Spring did not simply arrive at the mountain ranch, it triumphed. The snow retreated to stubborn, shadowy patches. The meadows, once brittle and brown, exploded in a frenzy of wildflowers, carpets of purple lupin and golden glacier lilies that swayed in the gentle breezes. The air, once sharp enough to cut, now carried the sweet, damp perfume of thawing earth and blooming chokecherry. The transformation outside the cabin's walls was mirrored perfectly within. Lyra was no longer a shadow clinging to doorframes. She moved with a new ownership, her stride long and unapologetic across the land she tended. She and Thorne had fallen into a rhythm that was as natural as the turning seasons. Their days were filled with shared labor, their nights with shared warmth. The separate bedrooms stood as relics of a past life, their doors permanently open, the larger room now truly theirs. In the quiet moments, her head resting on his chest as dawn light filtered through the window, his hand absently stroking the length of her braid as they watched the fire, a deep and unshakable peace had taken root. It was a peace woven from trust, from passion discovered, from the simple, profound joy of being seen. It was on a morning of such perfect peace that the past decided to call. Thorne was repairing a harness on the porch, Lyra beside him weaving a new basket from willow switches, when they heard the distinct sound of approaching horses. Not the single, plodding step of a neighbor's mare, but the synchronized tread of several riders. They appeared from the tree line, 3 men, tall and austere, clad in the distinctive, rugged leathers of the High Clan. Lyra's hand stilled. The willow switch snapped in her grip. The men rode into the yard and dismounted, their eyes missing nothing. They saw the robust garden Lyra had planted, the formidable stack of firewood she had split, the overall sense of prosperous order. But their gazes, cold and assessing, settled on Lyra herself, then flicked to Thorne with clear derision. The leader, a man with iron-gray streaks in his beard and eyes like flint, stepped forward. His name was Cale. "Lyra," he said, his voice a gravelly echo of the mountains. "You look well-fed." It was not a compliment. It was a probe, seeking evidence of softness, of degradation. Lyra set her broken willow aside and rose to her full height. Thorne stood slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers, positioning himself subtly beside her, not in front. "Cale," Lyra acknowledged, her voice steady. "We came to see the fulfillment of the pact," Cale stated, his eyes sweeping over Thorne with dismissive scorn. "To see how the ranch dweller manages with a real woman." A cruel smirk played on his lips. "Or does she merely play the ox for you, little man? Do you hide behind her skirts when the wind blows hard?" The other 2 men chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. The words were meant to wound Thorne, to reduce him. But they also sought to shame Lyra, to frame her strength as a grotesque servitude. Thorne felt Lyra tense beside him. He saw the old shadow of doubt try to cross her face, the fear that these men, who represented her entire former world, might see a truth she had only just stopped believing. He moved then. Not with aggression, but with a deliberate, calm finality. He stepped forward, not to confront Cale, but to stand at Lyra's side. He then did something that silenced the men's smirks more effectively than a shout. He slid his arm around Lyra's waist, his hand resting possessively, lovingly, on the curve of her hip. The gesture was intimate, confident, and spoke of a claim that went far deeper than any pact. He looked Cale directly in the eye, his voice clear and carrying in the spring air. "You look at her and see a giant," Thorne said, each word a hammer strike. "You see a thing to be bargained. I look at her and I see my wife." He felt Lyra draw a sharp, soft breath beside him. "I see the strongest heart I have ever known. I see the woman who saved my life, who fills my home with light, and who holds my own heart so gently I wonder sometimes how I ever lived without her." He tightened his hold on her. Your pact is fulfilled. Your debt is settled. Now, you will take your judgment and your small minds, and you will leave our land. The silence that followed was absolute. The mockery had drained from the clansmen's faces, replaced by stunned incomprehension. They had expected cowering, or perhaps brutish domination. They had not expected this, a united front, a love declared without shame, a man who was not afraid to stand beside his powerful wife and call her his strength. They saw the way Lyra now stood, not hunched, but tall and proud, her head high, her body leaning into Thorne's touch as if it were her anchor. Cale's flinty eyes darted between them, searching for a crack, a lie. He found only solid, unbreakable truth. With a grunt that might have been concession or disgust, he gave a curt nod. Without another word, he turned, mounted his horse, and led his men back the way they came. They disappeared into the trees, leaving only the scent of trampled grass and a settled score. When the last sound of hoofs faded, Lyra turned to Thorne. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant, a sun breaking through the last clouds of a long winter. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss of victory, of possession, of pure, adoring love. That night, their union was a celebration. It was no longer the tender, exploratory dance of the stormy night, nor the passionate, regular rhythm of the weeks that followed. This was joyful, confident, and deeply connective. In their bed, there was a playful strength, a give and take that was as equal as it was electrifying. Her embraces were fierce, holding him to her as if he were her very source of life. His touches were deep and knowing, drawing sighs and gasps that were her gifts to him. They moved together in the dark, speaking love with their bodies, the last vestige of her old fears dissolving forever under the certainty of his devotion. Afterward, tangled in the linens and each other, they spoke of the future, not as a vague hope, but as a blueprint they would build together. They talked of expanding the garden, of building a covered porch where they could watch the sunset over the western peaks. Thorne spoke of forging her a proper set of tools, designed for her hands. And then, in a hushed, wondrous tone, Lyra spoke of a child. A child who might have her stature and his calm eyes, her strength and his gentle smile. A child who would be born into a home where love was not a pact, but a choice made anew every single day. Their love, which had begun as a quiet, lonely agreement between two strangers, had grown into something as wild and enduring as the mountains themselves. It was a shelter, a source of strength, an unexpected and glorious blossom in a hard world. The ranch on the mountain was no longer just a piece of land, it was a kingdom, its borders defined not by fences, but by the reach of their intertwined hearts. And as the embers died in the hearth, casting the room in a soft, rosy glow, they slept, two souls who had journeyed from duty to desire, and found, in each other, a forever home. If you journeyed with Thorne and Lyra from fear to trust, from a cold pact to a burning, forever love, then you understand the power of a story that seeks the heart behind the strength. Our channel is dedicated to tales like theirs, where love is an adventure, acceptance is earned, and passion is a language spoken in glances and touches. We craft new worlds weekly, exploring the landscapes of desire and devotion. To ensure you never miss the next story that might capture your own heart, click subscribe and ring the notification bell. Become part of our community of listeners who believe in the unexpected bloom of love, even on the most remote mountain ranch. Your next adventure in romance awaits.